Hello, can you hear me? Wonderful. You're very welcome to this session. My name is Hugh Murphy. I'm from Maynooth University, and I have the honour to chair this session. A couple of things, there's been some minor amendments. The oppressive pressure that Owen McCartney was feeling has resulted in him doing himself an injury, so he actually won't be here. So we will have a curtailed session. Now, that's obviously a loss of content and very interesting content, but what it means is that we can get to lunch quicker. And I've been asked by the Conul committee to suggest that as soon as we are finished, if people can make their way to the Octagon, I think it is. Yes, thank you, the Octagon. And we'll get all the good food. So we have two sessions now. The first one is from my colleagues on the IReL steering group, Rita Pinhasi and Arlene Healy. Arlene is sub-librarian in Trinity for Digital Systems and Services, and Rita is sub-librarian in IReL at Maynooth, and she's the IReL manager. So without further ado, I'll ask them to come up and talk about IReL past, present and future, please.
Okay, thank you, Hugh, and good morning, everybody. As Hugh has said, this is a joint presentation given by myself and my colleague, Rita Pinhasi. So we thought this was just a really excellent opportunity to talk about IReL. We don't really get a chance to do it very often, so we want to talk about how IReL has resulted really in all of the university libraries and the RCSI collaborating to deliver essential information resources to researchers. I guess referring back to Lorcan's talk, this is about the collective collection in the online sense. So I guess I want to go back a little bit, if you can bear with me, and talk about the origins of IReL really briefly. It has an interesting background. Back in the good old days, of the early days of the Celtic Tiger, the Irish government, for the first time really in the history of our young state, they had sufficient budget surpluses to be able to invest in research in a meaningful way. Significant funding streams became available because the government recognised the importance of research in developing Ireland as a shared, as a smart, I should say, or knowledge economy. So the investment in research happened, and it resulted in an exponential increase in research activity and a number of researchers working within the Irish universities. But it quickly became apparent that the universities lacked the necessary infrastructure to support these researchers. So that was in terms of physical space, equipment, and importantly for us, I guess, the information resources that they needed access to. Now, the funding was kind of flowing for the construction of research spaces and for lab equipment. And I suppose the foresight then of librarians at the time and senior researchers, they got together and decided, well, lobbying needed to commence to start the process of getting funding together for funding a shared research eLibrary. And really getting an understanding that this was an essential piece of research infrastructure. So looking at the funding then, I suppose the lobbying was successful, great news, and Science Foundation Ireland at the time, who are of course the main provider of research funding for STM at the time and continue to be so, they came forward with the funding, and IReL was launched in 2004. So subsequently, I suppose the Higher Education Authority saw the value of IReL to the wider academic community. They came on board with funding and sort of guaranteed it over multiple years. So that's all going good, but we had some colleagues in the Humanities and Social Sciences who said, well, what about us? We need access to these kinds of information resources as well. And so thankfully, I guess the HEA agreed to extend the funding for these resources in these disciplines. And around about this time as well, in about 2008, funding for the RCSI came on board as well. So just the current picture of funding then is interesting, I suppose. I mean, over time, really, the funding for IReL has come from a variety of government sources. And so the current picture is that the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation funds the STEM information resources, and the HSS resources are funded by the Department of Education and Skills, by the HEA's core grant, and the IUA Council kind of vote on this annually. So that just gives you a sense of really what's involved. Funding doesn't get guaranteed really year on year, and there's a lot of work that goes on in the background to secure it. I should just really flag quickly that there is a third kind of grant from the HEA that funds access to 2 EBSCO collections for the Institutes of Technology. Now, just to talk about some of the important core principles behind IReL. We've talked about the fact that it's been centrally funded. That's really important. I'd also just flag as well that institutions do have, are committed, the IReL members are committed to maintaining a spend on information resources that they were subscribing to historically pre-IReL. It's just an interesting thing, and it's an important kind of key tenet of IReL. We call those resources the Bible resources, and that's strictly adhered to. IReL is only for online resources, mainly full-text resources, obviously journals and databases. All the agreements are negotiated on the basis that it's access for all staff and students and researchers of the 7 universities and the selected resources then for RCSI. Now, the resources are selected based on a consultation process across the research community. I'll come back to that in a minute. And of course, any of the resources that are selected, reflect demand across all 8 members. Value for money is key, obviously, and impact and usage has been analysed from the beginning. Again, I'll come back to those points. Now, for those of you who just aren't really aware of kind of who IReL is, as it were, how is it made up? Well, again, I suppose given that it is a consortium of 8 institutions ranging across this full gamut of disciplines, it's really important, and was always important, that there's a solid kind of governance structure operating underneath it all to ensure transparency, equality of voice to all of the members and institutions involved. So the structure, really, as depicted by this graph, was put in place. IUA Librarians group being very central, having overall responsibility for IReL, determining its policy in consultation with the funders and the research community. We've got the IReL office at Maynooth, represented here today by Rita. They're based, as I say, at the moment in Maynooth, and are really responsible for the negotiations, license agreements, managing all the financial information. But they're ably assisted by 2 groups, the IReL steering group, of which I'm a member, representing that group today, and the IReL monitoring group. So I said we'd come back to talk about the selection and how we kind of identify the relevant resources and how we kind of consult and liaise with the research community. Well, again, I just need to go back to the start of IReL and reflect on the fact that when it was established, the kind of people driving that were predominantly principal investigators, those being funded by SFI. So that kind of core set of resources was selected by that group. So there was a process, obviously, of engagement between the researchers and the librarians at the time to establish what resources were required. And there were subsequent kind of surveys that have kind of checked that, sanity checked that, to see are the resources reflecting current need. So, I mean, this diagram really kind of illustrates the process, but I mean, essentially, it's ongoing consultation, things like usage, value for money, licensing conditions, the subject coverage, all these kind of factors come into it around the decision to renew or potentially cancel a resource. Because I guess, as we all know, in the last couple of years, pressure on resources has been such that, in fact, the kind of review of resources has been around kind of what to cancel and not what to what new resources to add into the collection. So, yeah, that's something to consider. So what's in IReL? Well, again, just a selection of the kind of providers and publishers that are involved, of course not mentioning them all, that wouldn't be possible, but yeah, there's a lot of content basically. We've got 48 e-journals collections, and we've got small society publishers represented there, we've got the major e-journal collections and the aggregators. There are also 25 databases, indexing and abstracting databases, the traditional kind of databases. We've got some ebook collections, 17 ebook and reference collections, and actually, probably quite unusually for a consortium, we've got 29 single titles as well. They would have been identified by the researchers as being required. So it's about a total, it's a difficult one to put a number on, but it's something like about 25,000 titles. There might be some duplication when we do some of the counting. As I said earlier, value for money has been key. There's been 2 kind of major metrics that we've been counting right from word go, value for money and usage being the 2 key ones. This graph really shows that thankfully the cost per use has been kind of declining over time, which is excellent news, reflecting the relevance and popularity of the resources for both academic staff and students. Currency fluctuations in recent years has meant the cost per use is kind of, on that line where it's kind of tapering sort of off a little bit. So yeah, that's just a reflection of the world economy, I suppose. Usage is also very good. We've got some more detailed figures here on usage. Essentially in 2015, we've got 16 million transactions across the consortium. It's quite a staggering figure, really. 16 million transactions, meaning either a full text download of a journal article or a book chapter or a search of a database. So in fact, that figure from 2015 was the highest number of transactions since the beginning of IReL. Yeah, again, I suppose we are always at pains to kind of, find new ways of measuring the value and impact of IReL. Those two metrics are very interesting, but we're conscious that there may be not enough to be measuring. The monitoring group then have been looking in recent years at other approaches to evaluating the impact and value of e-journals on research. And an approach we've used is a blending of bibliometric data and usage statistics. And essentially the outcome of that study demonstrated that there's an increase in research productivity and research impact in Ireland, of course, and we know that from various different studies and the sort of ranking exercises that go on. Now, of course, there's a variety of factors that are involved in that, but we do feel that these results point to the availability of the online information resources playing a significant role. And I'll just wrap up by saying that, here's one interesting diagram that talks about the fact that IReL is providing close to 90% of the top 200 journals in which researchers from the IUA universities and RCSI publish in, and similarly provides access to nearly 90% of the top 200 journals that cite researchers in those institutions as well. So we think that points to the impact of IReL on research. I'll hand over to Rita.